March 22, 2006, a small, tight-knit congregation in Selmer, Tennessee, gathered for Wednesday Bible study, waiting for their lead preacher, Matthew Winkler, to walk through the door. He never arrived. Inside the church-owned parsonage, church members found him dead from a single shotgun blast to his back, while his wife, Mary, and their 3 young daughters had completely vanished. When police caught up with Mary hundreds of miles away on the Alabama coast, the woman everyone regarded as the perfect minister's wife uttered 4 chilling words that would define the entire case. "My ugly came out." Want more true crime stories that look past the headlines to find the truth? Subscribe now and hit the notification bell so you never miss our next deep dive. The fundamental tragedy of the Matthew and Mary Winkler case did not begin on the night a shotgun blast shattered the quiet of a Tennessee parsonage. It began years earlier, meticulously buried beneath layers of starched Sunday shirts, polished church pews, and the heavy, suffocating pressure of a flawless public reputation. In a deeply conservative, tight-knit religious community, your public image isn't just a part of your life, it is your life. And behind the front door of the Winkler home, that image was a beautiful lie designed to mask a terrifying reality. To understand how this marriage transformed into a psychological pressure cooker, you have to understand the massive expectations placed on the shoulders of Matthew Winkler. Matthew wasn't just a preacher. He was true religious royalty, born into a legendary preaching dynasty within the churches of Christ. His grandfather was remembered across multiple states as a preacher's preacher, a towering figure of spiritual authority. His father, Dan Winkler, was equally revered, occupying some of the most prominent pulpits in the faith. His uncle preached. His brothers preached. In their world, the Winkler name didn't just mean family. It meant absolute moral rectitude, biblical authority, and the divine right to lead. As a teenager growing up in Texas and Tennessee, Matthew possessed the natural athletic talent and physical build to pursue a future in football. He could have carved out his own path, free from the family business. Instead, he made a conscious choice to lay those secular ambitions down, stepping directly into the footsteps of the generations before him. To be a Winkler meant carrying the spiritual standard for hundreds of faithful families. Church wasn't a weekly obligation or a social hobby. It was the entire center of gravity for their family identity, their social circle, and their expected future. Matthew was being groomed for the spotlight, conditioned to command respect, maintain order, and never show weakness. Miles away, in a different corner of that same conservative religious world, a quiet girl named Mary Freeman was navigating her own invisible cage. From her earliest childhood, the script for her life was already written. Do well in school, obey your elders, avoid conflict, and remain thoroughly respectable. Those who grew up with Mary didn't remember her as rebellious, loud, or dramatic. She was the definition of dutiful and passive, a girl completely shaped by the strict rhythms of church life. When she reached college age, she enrolled at Lipscomb University in Nashville before transferring to Freed-Hardeman University in Henderson, Tennessee. Freed-Hardeman was a deeply conservative institution tied directly to the churches of Christ, and it was there that Mary chose to study special education, a field perfectly suited to her patient, gentle nature. It was on that deeply religious campus that the ambitious, young preacher in training met the quiet, respectful co-ed. What followed was a whirlwind, fast-paced 3-month courtship. On April 20, 1996, they exchanged vows and Mary Freeman officially became Mary Winkler. From the outside, it was the ultimate fairy tale match. 2 devout young students, marrying within the faith, actively preparing to build a family dedicated to serving God. To their peers, they were the golden couple. But the moment the honeymoon ended and the sanctuary doors closed behind them, a dark, hidden reality began to take root. According to the chilling testimony Mary would deliver years later, the heavy shadow of intimidation and manipulation settled over their home almost immediately. Mary claimed that what began as subtle behavior slowly hardened into absolute, unrelenting control. She described a domestic life where she was systematically isolated from the people who loved her and subjected to constant, deeply personal belittling. Matthew, she claimed, was a man intensely obsessed with discipline, structure, and total submission within his household. By 2002, the emotional weight became so entirely unbearable that Mary took a desperate, almost unthinkable step for a minister's wife. She asked Matthew for a divorce. He flatly refused. Paralyzed by fear, deep religious shame, and the terrifying unknown of what he might do if she pushed further, Mary backed down. She stayed. As the years marched on, the cracks in the facade began to manifest in quiet, haunting ways. Those closest to Mary started noticing things were terribly wrong, even if nobody dared to say it out loud. Her sister, Tabitha Freeman, would later testify to a profound, heartbreaking shift in Mary's personality. She realized she couldn't remember hearing Mary laugh anymore. The cheerful girl they grew up with had vanished, replaced by someone who was simply hollow and profoundly unhappy. Then came the physical red flags. Her other sister, Amanda Miller, recalled catching a glimpse of a dark bruise on Mary's skin. Afraid that pushing too hard or asking the wrong questions would cause Mary to retreat further into isolation, Amanda stayed silent. But the bruises kept appearing. Her father, Clark Freeman, saw them too. Driven by a desperate need to protect his daughter, he confronted Mary directly, telling her outright that she looked like a severely abused woman. He brought up the subject of her leaving Matthew more than once, pleading with her to walk away. But bound by the intense pressure to protect her husband's career and the holy image of their family, Mary vehemently denied the abuse every single time, putting on a brave smile and insisting everything was perfectly fine. While a quiet misery was gripping the interior of the parsonage, Matthew's professional ministry career was flourishing exactly as the Winkler dynasty intended. After graduating, he built a stellar reputation as a highly disciplined youth minister, serving congregations in Nashville and McMinnville, Tennessee. But hints of a demanding, volatile temperament occasionally leaked beyond the church walls. A church secretary in McMinnville later dropped a troubling breadcrumb, testifying that while Matthew appeared pleasant at first, he grew increasingly harsh, demanding and cruel toward the staff over time. An acquaintance recalled an incident where Matthew flew into a terrifying, disproportionate rage, screaming at a family over something as minor as a barking dog. But because these outbursts were viewed as a man simply demanding order and discipline, the community looked the other way. By 2005, the family had grown to include 3 young daughters, Patricia, Mary Alice, and baby Brianna. That same year, Matthew reached his ultimate professional milestone. He was appointed as the lead pulpit minister at the 4th Street Church of Christ in Selmer, Tennessee, a small, quiet town of roughly 4,500 residents. In a town that size, a lead preacher wielding a congregation of nearly 200 members on a Sunday becomes one of the most visible, highly respected, and authoritative public figures in the entire county almost overnight. The Winklers moved into the church-owned parsonage on Molly Drive and seamlessly adopted their roles as the town's model pastoral family. Matthew commanded the pulpit with supreme authority and taught the adult education classes, while Mary dutifully managed the household, supported her husband, and taught the 2- and 3-year-olds in Sunday Bible class. To the elders and the parishioners, they were the absolute pinnacle of a Christian household. One church elder later remarked that if he had been asked to name the most perfect, ideal couples in the entire congregation, Matthew and Mary Winkler would have sat confidently at the absolute top of the list. There were no public arguments, no visible signs of discord, and no hints of the psychological pressure cooker building inside the home. They were the flawless family next door, living out a script written for them by generations of tradition. But behind that flawless surface, a dangerous, irreversible chasm was opening up. The distance between the holy image they projected on Sunday and the dark reality they lived on Monday had become a ticking time bomb. and by early 2006, the clock was rapidly running out. By the early months of 2006, the invisible walls closing in on Mary Winkler were no longer just built from the psychological weight of a suffocating marriage. A new, terrifying element had entered the pressure cooker of the Selmer parsonage, one that threatened to shatter the family's immaculate public facade forever. Alongside the alleged domestic misery, a desperate financial crisis was quietly unfolding in the dark, a secret so explosive that prosecutors would later argue it was the true catalyst for everything that followed. Unknown to the congregation at the 4th Street Church of Christ, and allegedly unknown to Matthew himself, Mary had become ensnared in a highly sophisticated, fraudulent check scheme. Drawn into an overseas scam originating from Canada and Nigeria, Mary fell victim to the classic trap. She was sent large, counterfeit checks, told to cash them, and instructed to wire a portion back under the promise of a massive future payout. Desperate for financial independence or simply drowning in household expenses, Mary cashed the checks. When the banks realized the drafts were entirely worthless, the reality set in. Mary suddenly owed financial institutions more than $16,000. To prevent her strict, order-obsessed husband from discovering the disaster, Mary began frantically shifting money between different bank accounts to cover the growing deficit, a desperate, illegal pattern known as check kiting. She opened a secret bank account entirely in her name, altered her mailing address to a private P.O. box, and even attempted to remove Matthew's name from their joint accounts. While Mary would later claim in court that Matthew was the one who forced her to make the suspicious deposits, prosecutors flatly rejected the idea. For Mary, the walls were structurally collapsing. The financial trap reached its absolute breaking point on Tuesday, March 21, 2006, when a prominent bank official contacted Mary directly, aggressively demanding an immediate face-to-face meeting. Her secret was hours away from being exposed to the world, and to Matthew. Then came the morning of Wednesday, March 22, 2006. According to Mary's own harrowing, emotional testimony, the final chain reaction began when their 14-month-old daughter, Brianna, started crying in her crib. Mary testified that an irritated Matthew kicked her out of bed, ordered her to handle it, and then stormed into the baby's room himself. In a claim that would send shockwaves through the community, Mary asserted that when she walked into the nursery, she witnessed Matthew covering the baby's mouth and nose to forcefully stifle the crying, leaving the infant struggling to breathe. This specific, troubling allegation of child endangerment became the absolute cornerstone of the defense's theory, though it was never independently verified by any outside witness or medical report. Mary testified that after calming the baby down, she walked back into the master bedroom, desperate to confront Matthew and plead with him to stop being so mean. What happened next remains one of the most heavily debated sequences in true crime history. Mary stated she remembered walking to the closet and picking up the family's loaded 12-gauge shotgun, but claimed her mind went entirely blank. She insisted she had no memory of aiming the weapon or pulling the trigger. The forensic reality, however, was brutally definitive. Matthew Winkler was shot once in the back at point-blank range while he lay defenseless in his bed. The massive blast tore 77 individual pellets into his torso, fracturing his spine and shredding his internal organs from a distance of just 1 to 4 feet. He did not die instantly. According to statements Mary later gave to investigators, Matthew heavily rolled off the blood-soaked mattress onto the floor. As he lay dying, Mary wiped the blood from his mouth. He looked up at her and asked a single, devastating question. "Why?" Mary whispered. "I'm sorry." But she did not call 911. Instead, investigators later found the bedroom telephone violently unplugged from the wall, its cord tangled directly beneath where the dying preacher's head had rested. Mary gathered her 3 young daughters, packed them into the family minivan with the murder weapon stashed in the trunk, and fled the state, driving south for hundreds of miles. That evening, The pews at the 4th Street Church of Christ filled up for Wednesday night Bible study, but the pulpit remained empty. Perplexed by the unprecedented absence of their highly disciplined minister, deeply concerned church elders walked over to the parsonage to check on the family. Stumbling into the master bedroom, they discovered Matthew's cold body lying on the floor. With Mary and the 3 young girls completely missing, a wave of sheer panic gripped the small town of Selmer. For a terrifying 24 hours, the community desperately feared that a ruthless killer had murdered the pastor and kidnapped his innocent family. The illusion shattered the very next day on the Gulf Coast of Alabama. Police spotted the Winkler minivan cruising through the beach town of Orange Beach, pulling the vehicle over in a high-stakes traffic stop. Officers safely removed the 3 children and searched the vehicle, immediately discovering the 12-gauge shotgun in the trunk. In an instant, Mary went from a deeply pitied, endangered missing wife to the prime suspect in a cold-blooded murder. During her immediate interrogation, detectives noted she was eerily detached, quiet, and subdued, not hysterical, not defensive. Before investigators even laid out the evidence, she looked at them and quietly muttered, "This is my last time to be with them," signaling she knew her pristine old life was gone forever. After 2 hours of intense questioning, she finally admitted to holding the gun, describing how Matthew could effortlessly nail her into the ground emotionally before uttering the phrase that would haunt the headlines, "My ugly came out." Mary was arrested, waived extradition, and was escorted back to Tennessee to face a charge of first-degree murder. The case immediately exploded into a national media sensation. It possessed every single element of a primetime psychological thriller: a prominent, holy preacher dead in his bed, a hidden web of international bank fraud, and a seemingly submissive, perfect pastor's wife turned fugitive. When the high-profile trial finally commenced in April 2007, the courtroom became a battleground between 2 completely irreconcilable narratives. Prosecutors built a fierce, unyielding case centered on cold, hard financial greed. They argued that Mary was a calculating woman who realized her massive check-kiting fraud was about to be exposed, choosing to execute her husband rather than face the public humiliation of ruin. They pointed out the highly deliberate physical sequence required to fire the weapon, retrieving the gun, loading it, violently chambering a round, and aiming it directly at a sleeping man's back, as absolute proof of cold, premeditated murder. But the defense team countered with a shocking, brilliant strategy that completely recontextualized the entire marriage. They argued that Mary was a severely traumatized victim of extreme coercive control, psychological torture, and severe sexual humiliation. In the trial's most dramatic, unforgettable moment, the defense attorney dramatically produced a pair of sky-high, white platform shoes and a revealing wig, forcing Mary to testify that Matthew had aggressively compelled her to wear them during coerced, demeaning sexual acts. The courtroom audibly gasped. The defense argued that on the morning of the shooting, triggered by the sudden fear that Matthew was actively harming their baby, Mary's mind cracked under the weight of a decade of abuse. She hadn't acted out of a calculated plan to hide money, they argued, but out of a sudden, desperate surge of protective panic. The jury was left to decide. Was Mary Winkler a cold-blooded assassin protecting a financial secret, or a terrified, broken woman who finally snapped? The trial of Mary Winkler culminated on April 18, 2007, leaving a packed courtroom and a captivated nation hanging in suspense. The jury had spent days weighing 2 drastically different portrayals of the Winkler household, one of a calculated execution to cover up bank fraud, and another of a desperate woman snapping after a decade of psychological and physical torment. Ultimately, the jury's decision reflected a deeply complicated middle ground. They fully rejected the prosecution's charge of first-degree murder, but they also refused to grant Mary total innocence. Instead, they returned a verdict of voluntary manslaughter, a legal acknowledgement that while Mary had intentionally taken her husband's life, She had done so under extreme emotional distress or provocation. The legal resolution of the criminal case, however, offered little comfort to anyone involved. On June 8, 2007, Judge Weber McCraw sentenced Mary to 3 years in prison. Yet, due to credit for time already served, and a judicial mandate allowing her to undergo mental health treatment in lieu of standard incarceration, Mary's remaining time in hard custody amounted to just 210 days. Shockingly, the judge ruled that up to 60 of those days could be served in an inpatient mental health facility rather than a prison cell. For the community of Selmer and the broader public, the lenient sentence felt like a jarring conclusion to an immensely violent act. For Matthew's family, the light sentence was a bitter pill to swallow, and it ignited a fierce, secondary battle that would play out in civil court, a brutal war for custody of the 3 Winkler daughters. Dan and Diane Winkler, Matthew's parents, had been raising the girls since the morning of the murder. Horrified by the defense's characterization of their son as a monstrous abuser, they aggressively filed to permanently terminate Mary's parental rights and pursued formal adoption. Simultaneously, they launched a massive $2 million wrongful death lawsuit against Mary, a strategic legal maneuver designed primarily to ensure that she could never financially profit from future book deals, movie rights, or media appearances. But Mary, usually so passive and conflict avoidant, fought back with shocking tenacity for her children. In a highly publicized move, she appeared on the Oprah Winfrey show Asterisk, utilizing the massive national platform to tell her side of the story, detail the alleged abuse within the marriage, and plead for the return of her daughters. The public strategy worked. In August 2008, both sides reached an informal, binding agreement. Mary officially regained full custody of her 3 girls, while Matthew's parents were granted structured visitation rights. While the legal battles quieted down, the forensic and psychological realities of the case remained a subject of intense analysis. The physical evidence presented at trial is what made the accidental discharge defense so deeply problematic for forensic experts. Matthew had been killed by a 12-gauge turkey gun, a heavy-duty shotgun engineered specifically for hunting. A firearms expert definitively testified that the weapon was fully functional, completely eliminating the possibility of a mechanical malfunction. To fire that weapon, a human being had to engage in a highly deliberate physical sequence of events. Mary had to physically walk to the closet, retrieve the heavy shotgun, load a shell into the mechanism, and rack the slide to chamber the round before raising it and pulling the trigger. For the prosecution, this exact multi-step process was the definition of premeditation. Each step required conscious, sequential intent. Furthermore, the autopsy added a disturbing layer of agony to the narrative. The medical examiner confirmed that the 77 pellets from the blast did not kill Matthew instantly. He survived for several minutes, slowly aspirating blood. The fact that the bedroom telephone was found violently yanked from the wall and tangled beneath his head strongly supported the theory that Mary had actively prevented a dying man from dialing for help. Psychologically, the case stands as a profound paradox. Experts in domestic violence have pointed out that Mary's behavior leading up to the shooting aligns precisely with the modern understanding of coercive control. Her family's observations, that she had completely stopped laughing, isolated herself, and covered up physical injuries, are textbook signs of an abused spouse suffering in silence. In deeply conservative religious communities, where traditional gender roles are fiercely enforced, and a wife is scripturally commanded to submit to her husband, victims often feel an overwhelming pressure to protect the household's holy image at all costs. To expose the minister's sins would be to destroy the entire community. Yet her chilling admission, "My ugly came out," remains open to interpretation. Was that ugly, the sudden, violent eruption of a decade's worth of repressed trauma finally breaking through a broken psyche? Or was it the panicked rage of a woman who realized her web of financial fraud was about to be exposed to a demanding husband? In the decades since the trial, the answers have remained locked away. Mary eventually retreated entirely from the spotlight, moving to rural Tennessee to raise her daughters in relative obscurity. Later diagnosed with multiple sclerosis, she focused entirely on her health and her family. Whenever reporters have tracked her down in recent years, her response has remained completely unwavering and quiet. We've moved on. But for the town of Selmer, the truth of what really happened behind the closed doors of the parsonage remains an enduring, haunting mystery.